This podcast is sponsored by Great White Hot Sauce. Do you like hot sauce? Then you'll love Great White Hot Sauce. It's a small batch handmade hot sauce. It's the sauce that bites. Find it at www.trygreatwhite.com. You won't regret it. Who were the best bands of the 80s? Well, I guess that depends on who you talk to. You see, the 80s was the birth of post-punk, new wave, synth pop, thrash metal, hair metal, to go along with good old rock and roll and the influence of MTV. So, who do you think the best bands of the 80s were? Let's see if they match our lists. Listen in and find out.
The KOFB studio presents Milk Crates and Turntables, a music discussion podcast hosted by Scott McLean with his co-host Jack Calabrese. Now, let's talk music. Enjoy the show.
Thank you to the wonderful Amanda for that introduction. As you just heard, this is Milk Crates and Turntables, a music discussion podcast. Each week, myself and my co-host, Jack Calabrese, discuss a certain topic. We debate. We agree. It depends on which way it goes. I don't know. Anyways, this week's episode is Best Bands or Artists of the 80s, Part 2. This is the first Part 2 we're doing, so it's going to be interesting. So without further ado, we're going to get right into it. I'm going to bring on my co-host, the one and only, the impeccable, the artistic, the amazing, I won't say amazing, I'll just say Jack Calabrese.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction.
It's the producer, he wrote the script.
How's it going this week?
It's going good, buddy. It's going good. You ready to jump into Part 2?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so last week we covered a handful of bands, U2, Duran Duran, I think you said Stevie Ray Vaughan. Mm-hmm. We discussed Aerosmith. I mean, we jumped into a whole lot of bands. But the 80s, again, is an interesting decade. There was such a diversity of music and not just bands, singular artists. So let's jump right into it. I'm going to kick off this week, Part 2, with a man that was very busy in the 80s, deceivingly busy, since he's known for some big hits and some big albums with a big movie. Prince, I would say, is probably... last week I said U2's the number one band and AC/DC was a close second, which it was debatable. And I understand that. But you can't deny Prince was pretty much part owner of the 80s. He came out in 1980 with Dirty Mind. That was, few people knew about it. It caught on. Then in 81, he comes out with Controversy. Great album. But he hits his stride in 82 with 1999. Then in 84, his monster, Purple Rain. Then in 85, Around the World in a Day. Then in 86, Parade. 87, Sign of the Times. 88, Love Sexy. And 89, Batman. So he did 9 albums. That's pretty old school. I don't know if there's many bands or artists that did 9 albums.
Oh, and don't forget, 9 released albums. I mean, supposedly...
Jeez.
He's got hundreds of songs in his vault.
So I was talking to my brother about that. My brother said he has 9 released. He said the same thing pretty much. He said, how many does he have in his vault that he didn't release in the 80s?
Yeah.
So, I mean, in the hits, 1999, Little Red Corvette, I Would Die for You, Let's Go Crazy, Purple Rain, When Doves Cry, Raspberry Beret, Kiss. You can go on with the hits that Prince put out. He started off as oh, look at this guy. The cover of Dirty Mind. He's got a trench coat, like a duster, the kerchief like the cowboy. Then he's got on a pair of panties and some stockings with a garter belt.
We'll talk about somebody that had some guts. He not only wore that on the cover of his album, but he actually opened for the Rolling Stones in the Tattoo You tour and came out on stage. I mean, think about that. How many Rolling Stones fans just eager for the Stones didn't want to hear that type of music, probably didn't even know who Prince was, and was probably like, who the fuck is this guy?
Oh, and that's what they were saying at the time. That because he wasn't popular. That album, Dirty Mind, is a fantastic album. Another perfect album from beginning to end. Great music. If you're into that music, it was a more stripped down Prince.
Well, he was kind of emerging. He was kind of finding his sound, But obviously, Prince is an absolute genius. And those the early part of the decade, So if you talk about Controversy, 1999, obviously Purple Rain, all brilliant albums, all listenable from side to side. Where I lose it a little bit with Prince, and it may be me more than it is Prince, is I thought as the decade went on, his albums got a little bit inconsistent. The Batman soundtrack is an interesting record. I don't think it's a great record. Around the World in a Day, Raspberry Beret, Pop Life, some great stuff on there, but all in all, not a great album. I think Sign of the Times, probably the best.
Great album.
Yeah, probably the best, especially, you got to remember, not only a great album, but a great double album. There's a lot of music that was that was put out there.
Yeah, and Prince had this interesting thing. He would change his bands up.
Yeah.
He had 1999, he was with Desmond and some other, I forget the other guitarist, and they were with him for a little while. Then he breaks off, gets, Prince and the Revolution. Then he kind of goes in another direction, eventually ends up Prince and the New Power Generation, which were really good. I mean, but he wouldn't put crap around him anyways. Did you know?
So let me ask you, you talk about, U2 probably being the biggest band of the 80s, but you think, in terms of individual, and we'll just say it, individual male artists, it's Prince?
I would say, yeah. I've always said, and you've heard me say this, the most talented artist, people, listen to what I'm saying, all right? Because people always get huff. They all huffy. The most talented, you and I have had this discussion, the most talented artist in the history of music is Stevie Wonder. It don't give me, Mick Jagger and Robert Plant's more. People, listen to what I say, okay? Listen to what I'm saying. The most talented artist, okay? Because he can do it all. Stevie Wonder can do it all. And he does it blind, in case you didn't know. Anyways, Prince is 1A, okay? Prince was an amazingly talented artist. Underrated guitar player, as we know.
I wouldn't call him underrated.
I think he was.
I think most people recognize that he was an amazing guitar player, especially that performance that he did.
Yeah, that was recent.
To George Harrison.
Yeah, but looking at what, I mean, that didn't just happen. He was always a great guitar player.
Yeah.
He always played guitar. He didn't just pick one up one day and say, it's just he didn't push it. He didn't put it in the forefront, But he was always but no one knew he played guitar because he'd be up there dancing and singing and doing his Prince stuff. And people didn't really pay much attention to his guitar playing. You know?
So let me ask you this though. So in terms of, who epitomizes the 80s? So, okay, you two from a band standpoint. Is it Prince or is it Michael Jackson?
Well, you'd have to say that's the question. I would say Prince because I look a little deeper into things. Michael Jackson was the king of pop, but Michael Jackson just sang. But we're not getting into the talent aspect of it. Michael Jackson was a monster. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, I mean,
I think he was a monster.
It's hard to, if you're talking about, who are the, kings of the 80s, if you're talking about, single male artist, Prince versus Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson was a phenomenon.
Yeah.
But kind of different, kind of poppy, kind of appealed to the kids more, certainly wasn't nearly as dirty as Prince was, but we certainly didn't know what the hell was going on with Michael in the 80s and beyond.
Do you think how much influence did MTV have on Michael Jackson's career?
Huge.
Right?
Yeah, I mean,
how much influence did MTV have on all these people's careers in the 80s?
Look, the MTV, the 80s was the MTV decade. And so, and I think that, you and I around the same age probably had cable TV right around the same time. And MTV, especially the early days of MTV, were just incredible. And they actually almost were incredible because they didn't have much of a choice. You didn't have a lot of bands that were putting out videos, certainly not multiple videos from a particular album. So, they had to play what they could get. So, you got exposed to a bunch of different bands that you probably would have not normally been exposed to had not it been for those early days of the MTV and just out of pure necessity. Do you remember when MTV first came out that they were 24 hours a day, but it wasn't 24 hours consistently? No. They played 15, 20 minutes of video, and then they went off the air for like 15 minutes, and then they came back on. And then they went back off. Do you remember that?
That's the old Stephen Wright joke. I went to a store 24 and the door was locked, and I knocked on the door, and the manager came to the door and I said, "Why are you closed? The sign says 24 hours." He says, "Not in a row."
Stephen Wright, hilarious.
So, yeah.
To answer your question, I think that. Michael Jackson certainly benefited by, MTV. So did Prince, and so did U2, and so did a lot of other bands. I think the interesting thing as it pertains to MTV and Michael Jackson is there was a period of time where MTV was accused of being kind of racist. And I struggle with that one a little bit because I had always looked at MTV, and I think that they looked at themselves as kind of an FM radio station, but it was a radio station that was, on television. It was on cable television, but their early days, I think they identified themselves as having a rock format, which I think just kind of naturally lends itself to.
Well, and remember now in the videos were put out by the record companies.
Yeah.
Right. The lowest budget possible. None of those videos, you watch these videos from the early 80s or the 80s in general, none of them make any fucking sense. I mean, one of the classic ones is that song by Haircut 100, Love Plus One. Great song. That's actually one of my favorite 80s songs, right? But they're in the freaking jungle and they're swinging from vines and loincloths, getting thrown in giant pots, getting, by cannibal native women. It has nothing to do with the song. It was all visual. They didn't go hand in hand.
But do you think that Haircut 100, that song would have actually gotten the airplay that it got had it not been for MTV? Or how about
Um,
the Greg Kinn band or Tommy Two Tone or a lot of those early artists I don't think would have had the careers that they had. Not that they had long and illustrious careers. They certainly didn't possess the talents of Prince,
no,
but MTV, I think, exposed them to a much wider audience. And, they certainly never would have gotten popular in the Midwest.
right. You know who really benefited from MTV was the Go-Go's.
Fine band.
Ah.
Fine band. Did you
I
know?
I see they have not been listed and they're not on my list of best bands of the 80s.
Did you know
Oh, here we go.
that the Go-Go's are the first female band
Ah, Jesus.
to hit the top of the Billboard charts, having written all of their own songs and played all their own instruments, and nobody has done it since.
Let's get back to the show. So speaking of did you knows?
Let's go back to the show.
Yeah, you know what? Stop.
Ooh.
Okay. Did you know? Not only did Prince write Manic Monday for the Bangles and Nothing Compares to You for Sinead O'Connor, did you know Prince wrote I Feel for You by Chaka Khan?
By Shaka Khan, sure.
Yeah. Prince wrote that.
Another Hall of Fame nominee,
Yeah,
which is
she
supposed
says-
to be announced in, I think, like 2 weeks or so.
Also, Prince held the number one song, the number one album, and the number one movie all at the same time.
Purple
In
Rain, good movie,
1980s
bad movie.
1984. Purple Rain, When Doves Cry, and the album Purple Rain.
Purple Rain, good movie, bad movie.
It was a good movie. It was filmed the way it was filmed. You know what I mean? It's a great 80s film. The way it wasn't an over-the-top budget, but it wasn't a real, B movie. I liked it. Greatest soundtrack ever.
It was a great soundtrack. And not only for Prince, but the time.
Yeah.
Morris Day.
Morris Day got some juice out of that. So who do you
I'll
got?
tell you, so all of us growing up in Winthrop, there was an unofficial caravan because at the time you didn't have as many concerts playing at the Boston Gardens. They were all out 50 or 60 miles or whatever it was out in Worcester at the Centrum. And there was an unofficial caravan. It had to have been 100 different people from Winthrop that went out to see Prince. And what a lineup. If I remember correctly, was it Vanity 6?
Yeah.
The Time and Prince, just unbelievable show right around that time. So, I would actually even throw in that was probably one of the biggest tours. So biggest album, number one movie. He was everywhere. Prince was everywhere. Do you ever get to see him live?
I didn't. Remember, I had that 10-year gap where I was in the military making no money, so that meant no concerts.
Say, military should have gotten in free.
I agree. So who do you got, man?
I tell you what, one of the big artists that we haven't spoken about, you may love him, you may hate him, is Bryan Adams. Huge in the 80s. So started out with his debut album in 1980, the Bryan Adams album, which really didn't have much on it. Popular in Canada, didn't really break in the US. Then You Want It, You Got It was released in 81. And then a big album for him, Cuts Like a Knife, in 83. And then the Monster album. He puts out Reckless in 1985, 12 million copies sold. It's got Run to You on it. It's got The Kids Wanna Rock, Somebody, Heaven, Summer of 69, One Night Love Affair, It's Only Love with Tina Turner. I mean, Bryan Adams was enormous. And then he actually put out Into the Fire in 87, which I actually think is a pretty good record. I don't think it got nearly as much airplay. I think there was a lot of people wanted Reckless Volume 2, and I think that he may have been on the road a little bit too long, may have had a little bit of a writing drought, but there's some great songs on that record as well. But another guy that had to tour relentlessly for him to catch on, and another artist that was certainly helped by MTV.
Oh, Cuts Like a Knife was his breakthrough. That's the song. That's the video. that actually launched him into the stratosphere. Yeah, there's
Brian
no
Adams,
doubt
guilty pleasure, or is he cool?
he was cool, and then he wasn't. He started getting in the '90s, started getting into this fashion play thing, fashion, and trying to have this cool suave, thing going on, kind of like what Seal did in the '90s. Uh, but hey, listen, I never had anything against Brian Adams. I liked his music. I hate that fucking song "Summer of '69," but other than
Why?
that, if I never hear that song again.
Not it's a simple pop song and certainly overplayed. Certainly overplayed in the summer of 84, 85, whenever it was. It was summer of 85. I mean, that song, you just could not get away from it.
And that's it. I
Um,
would listen. I never turn off "Cuts Like a Knife." Never.
no, and I'll tell you, one of his best albums of the 80s, he actually put out a live album in 88. It's fantastic. There's not a bad song on it. He sounds good. The crowd is fantastic. Just really, really great record. There's a couple of covers on it as well. But I mean, it's just one hit after another. And that's what it was like seeing him back in those days. I mean, and I think that, if you were to go out and see Brian Adams even now, he's one of those guys that you would go out to see him and you'd be like, oh my God, I forgot about this song. Oh my God, I forgot about this song.
Yeah. One of our viewers just messaged in, Dave Phillips. I thought you guys were talking about bands. We were. Last week we covered all mostly bands, but it's really hard to just do that. If we're talking about the 80s, I mean, this is where this show goes. That's why I say it's an organic show. The format is very loose. We can expound on things. We can branch off. It's all good. This week, I just kind of thought, because last week, while we're doing the show, people were messaging in, how about Prince? How about, you mentioned, Phil Collins. And so we just thought this week we'd make it a little more rounded. So, yeah, Dave, we're going to talk about bands too, but we'd be crazy to not mention these people, these artists. It just wouldn't make any sense. So that's where we go. So I think I'm gonna trump you on Brian Adams.
What are you talking about?
I think my next pick is gonna trump you. You said he was working, he was pumping out albums. John Mellencamp was a fucking beast in the 80s. So he starts off in 1980 with Nothing Matters and What If It Did. Then in 82, American Fool. 83, The Kid Inside. Then again in 83, Then 85, Scarecrow. 87, The Lonesome Jubilee. 89, Big Daddy. I mean, look at the list of songs. And my favorite song, my favorite, hands down, John Mellencamp song or John Cougar song. Take a guess.
Is
1980. It's probably.
I can hear the song in my head. I can't.
Ain't Even Done with the Night.
Ain't Even Done with the Night.
I love that song. I say this a lot, and I mean it when I say this. Absolutely one of my favorite songs ever. I can listen to that song on a loop. It's just such a cool song, And he was Johnny Cougar in 1980. So
I saw him in 1980 at the Berkeley Performance Center. He opened for Pat Benatar.
I'm going to trump you on that. I saw him in 91 at 93. It was 93 with my friend Eric Pelnis. I was stationed in March Air Force Base. He won a pair of tickets to go see the MTV Video Music Awards.
Oh,
hosted by Will Smith. They gave Richard Roundtree a legendary career award. John Mellencamp played. Michelle Indignacello played. It was actually pretty cool seeing it being done in L.A. I was stationed in Southern California, so yeah, that was a pretty cool place to see him. But he starts off 1980, Ain't Even Done with the Night. 82, Hurt So Good. 82, Jack and Diane. 83, Authority Song. 83, Crumbling Down. 83 Pink Houses, 85 Lonely Old Night, 85 Scarecrow, 85 Rockin' the USA. And that was a monster album.
Oh, sure it was.
That was a monster album. Scarecrow that was his monster.
Yeah.
Because that, and then Rain on the Scarecrow, Small Town. Then he does Lonesome Jubilee in 87, Paper and Fire in 87, Pop Singer in 89. I mean, he was, and you don't really think about it because he was just everywhere.
Big evolution. Johnny Cougar, John Cougar Mellencamp.
Yep, John Mellencamp.
And now John Mellencamp.
That took a lot of balls to do that. You had to be very confident in the fact that people are going to buy into this.
Yeah.
Because the record industry, and it was fickle because of MTV, and now he's changing his name. But you know what really broke it for him was MTV News. MTV News was a good way to transition for bands. You know? See, one of our viewers, Renee Torchy, I love you, Nolte.
So do you remember
he
Ain't
was
Even
the
Done
80s.
with the Night?
Huh?
Do you remember being in the Boston area? And there was a commercial that was played on the radio all the time. And they leveraged the beginning of that song, Ain't Even Done with the Night. Do you remember that?
The little, it was what was the instrument that they used at the beginning? Was
Like
it
a little mandolin type sound
yeah.
at the beginning.
I don't remember that, but
Tweeter, etc.
oh shit, yeah.
That was their, kind of their theme tune. And by the way, for those of you that remember John Mellencamp from back in the 80s and whatnot, don't leave him just in the 80s. Believe it or not, his last couple of albums are fantastic. Now they're really different. They're not pop albums. They're really more Americana. And you got to remember that John Mellencamp, has now been around for 40 years, and for a long period of time, and maybe even right now, smokes what, 3, 4, 5 packs of cigarettes a day.
Yeah,
He doesn't have the same voice that he does, but he's got some great kind of gritty, simple, stripped down albums that are absolutely fantastic.
Did you know?
Yes, I did.
He has a lifetime contract with Republic Records. Lifetime. That's unprecedented. That's unheard of. A lifetime contract. Talk about security in the record industry. And Republic Records they're not idiots either, evidently.
No.
That's a great move. If you could lock him down and you got his catalog, come on, man. But he's a good old boy. He's just a good old boy. I'm sure the deal was done on a handshake and a signature,
I'll tell you, the other thing that I like about him, first and foremost, and I know you got to see him through the, Video Music Awards, but even back in the 80s and 90s, just tremendous live act, crack, top-notch band. And, even now, the last time we saw him, which was only a couple of years ago, still just an absolutely amazing band. But the other thing that I appreciate him, a true artist, he's a ridiculous painter.
Yeah.
His paintings are absolutely incredible.
If he didn't go into music,
that he's done for a long period of time, and his paintings are friggin' expensive.
He said if he didn't go into music, he was going to pursue being an artist, a painter.
Yeah. The other thing that I love about John Mellencamp, he is one fucking asshole.
Yeah. Yeah.
No tolerance, doesn't suffer fools at all. He's a really, really smart guy.
Yeah.
Certainly not what they portrayed him to be back when he was Johnny Cougar.
Yeah.
And certainly not what you thought when you saw the video for Hurt So Good. But he is a guy that is a deep thinker, really well-rounded, really well-read, and he's a cranky old bastard.
He's got those Midwestern street smarts.
Yeah.
Those country boy street smarts.
And, I think part of that is, he's had a couple of heart attacks. He's actually lived on the road for a long period of time. It has got to be a drag when you're up there performing and you have some idiot in the third row for the first half hour, 40 minutes, 90 minutes of the concert yelling out Jack and Diane.
Yeah.
Play Ain't Even Done with the Night.
Yeah. All right, who's up? What do you got?
Give me another one. You keep going.
Another group that was kind of busy in the 80s, quietly.
Quietly Riot.
You know, that's the second bad joke.
It's late. What do you want from me? I'm
Don't make
tired.
me don't make me drop you to the bottom of the screen again. Okay. For the viewers. Talking Heads. Probably the seminal post-punk band as far as popularity and uniqueness. I would say Talking Heads in 77. Talking Heads 77 was the album, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you bring them into the 80s. Let's see. Remain in the Light, 1980. Speaking in Tongues, 83. Little Creatures, 85. True Stories, 86. Naked, 88. And their hits were Once in a Lifetime in 1980. That was from Remain in the Light. Burning Down the House from Speaking in Tongues, 83. My favorite Talking Head song, This Must Be the Place. Naive Melody.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I hated that song when I first, I would ignore it. But I listened to it one day, and people, if you haven't really, because everyone's used to Burning Down the House and Psycho Killer and Once in a Lifetime, go listen to This Must Be the Place on YouTube by the Talking Heads. It's such a unique and great song. It's kind of a happy song, you know? It's just a cool song. So you had that, and then Girlfriend is Better from Speaking in Tongues in 83, and She Was from Little Creatures in 85, Road to Nowhere, Little Creatures in 85. I mean, again, the hits just kept coming quietly with them. Like, they were not monsters of the Midway, but they were consistent, and they were pumping out great music in the 80s.
Yeah, the Talking Heads is one of those bands that kind of really bridged the gap and transcended, different audiences, right? So, a couple of minutes ago we talked about John Mellencamp. A couple of minutes ago we talked about Bryan Adams, and I think that people like them for what they are, but I think that if you go back into the 80s, you had people that were kind of more rooted in alternative music, and people
Right.
that were more into pop. And I think the Talking Heads is one of those bands that kind of could live in both of those worlds pretty effortlessly. And again, another band that was really hugely helped by MTV. Kind of an interesting band. I think that initially identified as a kind of you talk about them being a post-punk band, and they were in and around CBGBs when all that stuff was going on. But I never looked at the Talking Heads as a punk band by any means.
No,
I think
go on.
I think that they were punk in that they were kind of, bucking the norms and doing something different. But I thought that they were more of an art rock band, almost some along the lines of like a Jonathan Richman, kind of quirky, kind of funny, which makes sense because, Jerry Harrison, who plays in the Talking Heads, was, with those other folks.
Jonathan Richman, did he sing Roadrunner?
Yeah.
I love
So
that.
Jerry Harrison was in the Modern Lovers.
That I was listening to that the other day. Another fucking great song.
Yeah.
The Modern Lovers, Roadrunner. I'm in love in Massachusetts. That's such a great fucking song. I mean, we're talking about a lot of good songs tonight. I'm just in a good song mood, I guess.
I'll tell you, if you go back and you listen to those original Modern Lovers albums, they're fantastic.
Yeah.
They're quirky.
Yeah.
They never really got the airplay that they should have gotten.
No.
And I think it was because it was hard for record companies and radio stations to where do you place these guys? And they were kind of first in that regard, and not the first band, but they were certainly a type of band like that where they just couldn't label them and they couldn't market them.
Yeah.
So they kind of got lost in the mix. But I think the Talking Heads kind of took that and ran away with it. I mean, David Byrne is an absolute genius. I actually had the good fortune before this whole COVID thing, his American Utopia
on
tour.
Broadway, right?
But they actually did the initial run. They did kind of the practice run in Boston.
Ah.
And it was fantastic. I mean, just absolutely fantastic. And they
Oh,
were
he's
always,
always been a
the
great
Talking Heads
visual
were
artist.
always a great live band. And one of those bands, I mean, I almost give credit to David Byrne. He was the one that broke up the Talking Heads, and they've never recorded again together. Not really. They've never toured together. Not really. And I don't think he will.
He won't. No.
And I'm sure that they've thrown all types of money at them, and
he
he
doesn't
just
need it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just not where his head is at.
See them. But like Sting, he could do that stuff on his own. It doesn't matter. Did you know there is no "the" in Talking Heads?
It's just Talking Heads.
Talking Heads. Not the Talking Heads. Just Talking Heads.
Yeah.
You
Great
said
band.
"the" 5 times. You said "the" 5 times. I'm just correcting you.
I'm just,
I think I said it too. I said, all right. I'll throw myself on the sword.
So you know what? Now that we're talking about bands that may not be, the most popular bands of the '80s, maybe some people that were kind of regarded as a little bit of an underground band. I'll tell you one of my favorite performers. Sorry, Mr. Flynn, this is not a band, but this is an individual performer that I loved in the '80s and even in the '90s and even beyond that. Joe Jackson.
Oh, you're a huge Joe Jackson fan.
Love Joe Jackson.
I know you do.
I would actually.
I love that you love Joe Jackson.
What's that?
I said I love that you love Joe Jackson.
I love Joe Jackson.
Yeah, I love him too. But I know you're a slightly bigger fan than I am, but a very underrated.
Very, 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 very underrated. But I mean, he was absolutely prolific in the '80s. So I would actually even count "Look Sharp," which was technically put out
79.
in '79, but it was
Yeah.
it was the latter part of '79. So it really got a lot more airplay in '80. But then you talk about Night and Day, Body and Soul, Beat Crazy, Jump and Jive, where he introduced a lot of people, me included, into Cab Calloway and a lot of that old stuff from like the '40s and early '50s. I mean, a whole different genre of music. And he was really kind of an interesting guy to see live because he would come out and he would actually do a handful of songs. He would do a couple of popular things, but then whatever album he was touring on, he would play the entire album in its entirety in order. So, if you were not familiar with the new material, you had about an hour to kill before you got to hear, is she really going out with him, or Beat Crazy, or Stepping Out, or any of those things. And here's just another recommendation. He still tours. He plays a lot of little theaters. Deb and I saw him in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, at the Music Hall, which I think holds maybe 1,500 people. And he was phenomenal.
I'd love to see him, yeah.
Absolutely phenomenal. Still is the voice, still plays a lot of the hits and whatnot. Absolutely a great take. Totally underrated. Probably will never be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and has probably put out 3 times as much music as a lot of people that are in there.
Yeah. The one thing I could say about Joe Jackson that you cannot deny, he definitely has a face made for radio.
Yeah, he does.
He's not a good-looking man.
And another guy with an attitude. So, one of the
attitude,
first times
he does. Yeah.
Well, one of the first times I got to see him, so in the early days of Great Woods, which is a music venue in Mansfield, Massachusetts, long before it became the Tweeter Center and the Comcast Center and whatever else it's been called, it was Great Woods, and they had Joe Jackson play there, and it was more of an intimate crowd. They didn't fill the lawn or anything like that. I'm not sure that Joe Jackson could actually fill the lawn. And somehow, in the latter part of the concert, people started jumping up on the stage, and they were dancing. They were being respectful. They weren't bumping into the musicians or trying to steal the guitars or guitar picks or anything like that, but they were dancing. And I was in I think the second or the third row, but I was close enough to see Joe Jackson go to a woman and say, "Get the fuck off my fucking stage." Absolutely hilarious.
So there you go. So one of our viewers, again, Renee Torchi Nolte, she says, I saw him at the Somerville, and for Somerville, Massachusetts, for the podcast listeners, I saw him at the Somerville Theater many years ago. Tiny venue. People kept yelling out songs, and he said, I stopped doing requests 20 years ago. Yeah, he was ornery. He definitely, and he still is, I assume. Yeah.
Cantankerous old bastard. Maybe we can actually set up a double bill of him and John Mellencamp, and they can just fight in the middle.
That would be good to see. I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention the biggest selling duo of all time in music history, who another group that, although they had 4 albums in the 80s, that's just above my threshold. You know, I have that threshold for albums that they put out. Hall & Oates, monsters. Now, are they a band? Would you call them a band?
They're a duo. I
They're
would
a
call them
duo?
a band.
They have a band with them, but they both play guitar. They both play
I don't know,
different.
some people would actually say it's Daryl Hall and those other guys.
So in 1981, they come out with Private Eyes. And granted, they had been around since, 73,
Yeah.
which is amazing.
Sarah Smiles, still one of my favorite songs of all time.
Yeah, that they just pretty much made it through the 70s in that cesspool of music, that was floating around out there between AM Gold and, and Black Sabbath. They made it. They made it through the 70s. They survived. So Private Eyes in 81, H2O in 82, Big Bam Boom in 84, and Oh Yeah in 88. So that's 4 albums, right? 4 albums. 80, you got, as far as hits, You Make My Dreams, Kiss on My List, 1980, Private Eyes, 81, Did It in a Minute, 81, Man Eater, 82, I Can't Go For That, 82, Family Man, 83, 101, 83, Say It Ain't So, Say It Isn't So, 83, Adult Education, 84, Method of Modern Love, love that song, 84, Out of Touch, 84, Possession Obsession, 84, Some Things Are Better Left Unsaid, 84, Everything Your Heart Desires, 88. And they flooded the market with songs.
Yeah, you forgot one.
I forgot a bunch.
I'll tell you the one, like, I think really indicative of the early 80s. The hit, not by them, Paul Young. Every time you go away. They wrote that.
They wrote that, yeah.
So Hall & Oates, I wholeheartedly agree. Great band, great songs. Certainly had a huge resurgence, especially when they got into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. For me, I think that Hall & Oates is one of those bands that was actually hurt in some regard by MTV. I think that they became hugely popular because they were a staple on MTV, but their videos, some of them were so ridiculously stupid and overplayed that I think that they're to a certain extent, they probably weren't given the credit they were due.
I would have to say, and I'm just going to say it, I am not politically correct. So for those that like to be politically correct and those that like to be, they don't like to hear bad things, if you're listening to the podcast, turn it down for about 10 seconds. I'm going to give you a chance. 1, 2, 3. Turn your volume down. Their Christmas video, Jingle Bell Rock, is the gayest video I've ever seen. That's the only way I can put it. I'm just saying. It's a great song. It's a Christmas classic. But it's the gayest video I've ever seen.
You're on your own, big boy. Not jumping in on this one.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. I'm not going to use whatever jargon they're talking today. That's just the way it is.
So
Great
okay,
song.
so since you told that slightly off-colored story, I will tell this. I will tell this
Politically
story.
correct.
So, myself, Phil Kelly, I think was there, Doogie Talent, Hall and Oates were playing Concert on the Commons. So big park, I think it's Boston's answer to Central Park, obviously much, much smaller. But Hall and Oates were playing, and we had gone out and had a couple of beers, and we were going in to see them. And we were kind of walking through to get to the gate to get into the place. And people that didn't have tickets, they had, put out blankets, drinking wine and whatnot. And we were kind of weaving in between all of these people. And there were 4 guys that were on a blanket. And it was Phil Kelly, Kevin Talent, and then me. And as we cut through right by these guys, one of the guys said, "Ooh, I'll take bachelor number 3." And I just stood. I was stunned. And I was like, I'm gonna go see Hall and Oates. Thank you. Okay.
Hey.
Gotta go now.
Hey.
It was hilarious. Those guys, at the time, young idiots not knowing any better, they tortured me for the rest of the night. I was bachelor number 3 all night long.
Oh, that's great. Did you know that the name Hall and Oates is a media creation? The media created that name. They always went by Daryl Hall and John Oates on their albums. The media started calling them Hall and Oates. So they just kind of went with it.
It works.
Yeah. Uh-oh.
It works.
Hey,
but
Jack.
an interesting thing, an interesting thing though. So, you look at Daryl Hall and John Oates, and you talk about John Oates really being nothing without Daryl Hall. Remember, Daryl Hall put out a couple of solo albums. Were those good records? Did they
I
get
don't know.
airplay?
I didn't buy them.
No,
I saw them in concert at the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino in Hollywood, Florida. And Daryl Hall gave John Oates, a couple of freebies. Like he let him play a couple of his new songs, like 3 new songs.
And that's when you saw the majority of the audience go to the men's room or to the beer stand or whatever.
I believe so. That's when a lot of cell phones came out. And they weren't holding them up, waving them over their heads.
Yeah. but here's the thing. John Oates, some friends of mine actually saw me opened up for the Avett Brothers a couple of years ago, and they said just not really that interesting, not that compelling. Obviously a competent musician, can sing and whatnot, but just not really enough to kind of draw and hold interest. But, Daryl Hall, he had a couple of solo things that went really nowhere either. For whatever reason, those guys, it only works when it's the 2 of them.
Yeah.
And thankfully they got smart after a little while and they recognized that, hey, this is the thing that works for us. Now, give credit where credit is due. Live from Daryl's house, great program, and something a little bit different. And I think, more reflective of the YouTube podcast type generation, kind of a homegrown thing and really kind of interesting and cool. But those guys recognize that them as a unit is what works. And I wish that there were other bands that would follow that lead.
Yeah.
Look, I like Liam and Noel Gallagher, but I want to see Oasis. I like the Magpies Salute in the Chris Robinson band, just fine. But I want to see the Black Crowes.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. All right. So I was going to say something. I just drew a blank. Can you help me out, bachelor number 3?
How you doing?
Another group that was quietly busy in the 80s, REM. REM was again. They were a small monster in their own world. Mainstream. maybe not so much. MTV helped them a lot. They came out in 83 with Murmur, 84, Reckoning, 85, Fables of the Reconstruction, 86, Life's Rich Pageant. Those were kind of, Document in 87.
Green.
Dead Letter Office, Rarities and B-Sides. In 88, I think they did that.
Great version of Toys in the Attic on
Oh my God. See, yeah, exactly. They did a cover of Toys in the Attic that will make your skin crawl. I mean, I want to eat broken glass and thumbtacks rather than listen to that song.
So were you a big REM fan?
I was. I liked REM. I always I never turned them off. I got sick of losing my religion. But they were a great band. They were very unique in their style. They were very low key. They didn't go seeking out the big fame and all the. They just did their thing, and I think that was that Athens, Georgia thing, anyways, right? That style, that laid back college town style or vibe. Although they became big, really big. And then, so some of their hits, you got Fall on Me from Pageant in 86, Driver 8 from Fables of the Reconstruction 85, Radio Free Europe, South Central Rain, Don't Go Back to Rockville, Orange Crush, The One I Love, Finest Work Song, Pretty Persuasion, Superman, Talk About the Passion. I mean, they just, again, a list of songs that are just, and I'm not, again, that's not even all of them.
So REM for me is one of my favorite bands, has been one of my favorite bands for forever. I was heartbroken when they actually broke up. And I think they lost their way well beyond, the 80s. But I mean, even in the 80s, I think there were two phases of REM. There's the IRS years where they were truly a college band.
Yeah.
Really played more. I think at most they were played, on Sunday nights on BCN, and maybe played a little bit more in WFNX, which was more of an alternative, radio station. But those first couple of albums, Murmur and Reckoning, especially were just, I loved those records because they were doing something that was a little bit different compared to some of the other, alternative music. The other alternative music, either really loud, crazy guitars or a lot of synthesizer. And you know how I feel about synthesizer. I just love it. But these guys really came up with a unique sound that was really different. It was really hard to understand what Michael Stipe was friggin' singing about. But those records were brilliant. So
yeah.
Murmur, Reckoning, Fables of the Reconstruction, Life's Richest Pageant, I think were all on IRS. And then they get the big record contract and they go over to Warner Brothers. And that's where you see a little bit of a change. That's where you actually get more into the MTV stuff. Previously there may have been, videos that they had put out that were played on MTV's 120 Minutes. But even in the early days of MTV, REM was not getting a lot of airplay.
No.
It wasn't until they had the machine of Warner Brothers behind them that they really broke and became the hugely popular band. And to me, not the same band. I still loved a lot of their stuff, but I had to wait a little bit in between Shiny Happy People, Losing My Religion, and Stand. There are some of their songs that never got my arms around and still don't particularly care for them. I always like the deeper cuts, more interesting.
We can say that for other bands like U2. There's a bunch of U2 songs. We love U2, but like you said, you and I are both on the same page with Mysterious Ways. Throw that in the trash can. It's such a hack song,
But a lot of those
Shiny Happy People is a hack song too.
Yeah, a lot of those bands. I tell you, who we haven't spoken too much about yet in terms of the 80s, and I don't want to leave REM totally behind yet. but Springsteen, some of his songs in the 80s. And if you want, I'll hold off on that. Let's finish the REM thing. Another monster live band. They were incredible live, especially in those earlier days. And the other thing that was really cool about coming up and getting into music, especially in the early 80s, is you actually got to go along for the ride. Like the first time I saw REM, I saw them at the Orpheum, and then I saw them play like BU. So to get to see them in those early days where they were still finding their way and playing some of the smaller venues. And then obviously they were playing much larger venues. As a matter of fact, I think that they were the band that opened the Fleet Center.
Okay. I wasn't around.
They were the first concert that played the Fleet Center.
Hey, all right. Yeah.
They were a band that lost their way. So they had their drummer.
Brain cancer, brain tumor.
He had an aneurysm.
An aneurysm, yeah.
While they were on tour, and I think he made one more record with them, and then he said, "You know what? I'm done. I'm tired of touring the world. This repetition of record, go on the road for a year, record, go on the on the road for a year." And I don't think that band was ever the same. And I think they really struggled to stay relevant. They started to get into more of the experimental music. I think they wanted to be Radiohead, quite honestly. So you had the Reveal album, you had the Up album that were just, just a little bit not focused. They kind of got away from their traditional formula or sound. And then in the latter part, in the last couple of albums that they made, I think that time had kind of passed them by. And they hung it up, but I actually think that their last album, Collapse Into Now, was a great record. A lot of great stuff on it. Nobody listened to it.
Did you know? Before Michael Stipe came up with the name REM, that he randomly came across in a dictionary, the band considered a couple other names. Some of the suggestions included Negro Wives or Cans of Piss. That's a fact. That's a true to life. Did you know?
They did a couple of surprise shows in clubs, and they billed themselves as Bingo Handjob.
So there you go. This laid back group coming up with this crazy shit. So you were going to say Bruce Springsteen?
Yeah. So, Springsteen is, I don't know. I struggle with Bruce. So, let me say for the record right up front, I'm a huge, Springsteen fan. And there are, certainly the albums in the late 70s. And I think that, there are some of his albums in the 90s and early 2000s that I probably like as much, if not better, than some of the stuff that he did in the 80s. I think he did some, great stuff in the 80s. So when did Nebraska come out? Is that 82? So that's a great record. But, a lot of people don't know that record, and a lot of people don't like that record because it's not the big sound, Clarence Clemens, huge band. It's basically him with a, kind of a tape recorder. It's almost demos. But that's one of the things that I really like about that. But his big album in the 80s, and one of the biggest selling albums in the 80s was, Born in the USA. There's a bunch of stuff on that record that I can't stand, including the title track.
Yeah. Talk about overplayed. I mean, he's so Born in the USA 84. Tunnel of Love was a good album.
Good album, great song.
Oh, that's, again, one of my favorite Bruce Springsteen songs. I would say Tunnel of Love is right up there.
First time ever played live, I think, was the opening night of the Tunnel of Love tour. Worcester Centrum, 1987.
Really?
That's where they opened their tour.
That's when I went in the Air Force. So there you go. That was the start of my missing concerts. Did you know?
God almighty.
Did you know that it took them, and this is a 70s album from Born to Run, it took them 16 hours to record the saxophone solo for Jungle Land. 16 straight hours in the studio. And I guess when Carol Clemens was told that, he's like, really? I thought it was only 5. Yeah. So there's that. And also, did you know that Courtney Cox and her friends went to a Bruce Springsteen concert, and he actually pulled her up on stage to dance with her before
the video
Dancing in the Dark came out?
Yeah.
And then they revisited that, and that whole scene played out in the video.
But
she was
you know what? I mean, iconic video of the 80s. But I have to tell you, I struggle with that record. I'm not a huge fan of the song "Born in the USA." I am not a huge fan of "Dancing in the Dark." Although I will tell you that his live version of it, that he still plays in concert, is much better than what's on the record. Glory Days, don't like that song. Never did.
He doesn't. Why doesn't he play that in concert anymore? He stopped playing it for some reason. I never figured out what it was. What was the song that he wrote for the Ramones?
So that is Hungry Heart.
Hungry Heart. Yeah, he wrote that for Joey Ramone. Joey Ramone asked him. They were hanging out. They met, and he said, "Hey, write me a song." So Springsteen was like, "Yeah, sure." That night, he went home and wrote "Hungry Heart." Then he showed it to his manager. His manager said, "You are not fucking giving that song away."
John Landau said, "No way
you are not giving that away."
But what was Joey Ramone hoping to replicate or duplicate? It was the success that he had writing with Patti Smith.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what they said.
Patti Smith
gave away,
and Springsteen wrote. Oh my God, not Dancing Barefoot.
Who, Joey Ramone?
No. With Patti Smith.
Because the Night.
Because the Night. It was Because the Night. Yeah. Ooh, I almost lost that one. Woo.
Now, Manfred Mann did a couple of great covers of Bruce Springsteen songs. Better than Bruce Springsteen sang them.
Maybe.
I think he did. I mean,
Blinded by the Light?
Maybe. Blinded by the Light?
So you know what I'll give Manfred Mann credit for? They made that song theirs.
They certainly did. They made every song
because the Springsteen version it's not that it's a folky song, but I mean it's definitely a stripped down version compared to, Manfred Mann brought in the synthesizers, which is why you like that song so much, or that version so much. And then they ruined it by saying douche instead of deuce.
Everybody thinks they say douche. He says deuce.
He says they say douche.
No.
You douche.
This is British. They don't know what they're talking about. All right, we've hit an hour, buddy. Another fast hour. Let's wrap this up.
Man, we didn't even talk about Tom Petty. We didn't talk about the Eurythmics. We didn't talk about the Psychedelic Furs. We didn't talk about.
I think we start getting diluted. We were actually talking about the best, and when we say the best, I think we mean the biggest. If we could run down the 80s, let's just do we could do another show on who were the greatest new wave artists of the 80s, because that was a big movement. We could do a lot of things with this, but I think we've pretty much I got to throw in Madonna. We didn't
even talk about Huey Lewis in the news.
Oh, Jesus.
Madonna
was a monster in the 80s,
Are you a Madonna fan?
Yeah. I'm not a huge fan, but I don't mind her music. And then, let me throw in one last monster of the 80s who can't be denied. Rock and Roll Hall of Famers. Very controversial Rock and Roll Hall of Famers. Run DMC. They were the first rap group to go gold. I mean, they pretty much broke that barrier down. They brought rap into the suburbs. The style, the white, Adidas, the whole thing. They had an image. They had a unique sound. They crossed over. They were the first to cross over into rock and kind of twisted together, which took a lot of that. That's not easy to do that. But I'd say in Run DMC, so I got my rap group in.
Run DMC, I think the only rap band that played at Live Aid.
Yeah, I mean they were pretty big in the 80s, man. So
you know what? I remember when they first came out, one of the things that I just didn't understand were the Adidas with no laces. I was like, wait a minute. But that was kind of their thing. So, that was the time where I was actually working at Strawberries Records and Tapes in downtown Boston, downtown crossing on Washington Street, and Run DMC. That King of Rock album was just huge.
Oh, yeah. And so was Raising Hell in 86 the next year. I mean, their momentum carried them right over. And then Tougher Than Leather in 88. They just really, and they had 4 albums. They had Run DMC, the self-titled album, in 84. So, but they really broke it with King of Rock. That's when they broke loose. Rick Rubin, and Russell Simmons were brilliant promoters. They knew what they had, and they knew how to sell it because they opened up a Pandora's box of music that's still going strong today, although it's diluted, convoluted shit today. But
I would have loved to have seen that early Rick Rubin tour with Run DMC, and the opening band was actually the Beastie Boys.
The Beastie Boys, yeah, who were originally a punk band.
Yes,
they
decided,
were. let's
By the way, if
up.
you have access to Apple TV, great documentary or whatnot is the Beastie Boys. And it's not really even a documentary. It's actually the 2 surviving Beastie Boys on stage telling their story with a lot of video clips behind them. Really, really, really well done.
I'll have to try to illegally download it somewhere because I don't have Apple TV, but it's out there somewhere. It's streaming somewhere. All right. Well, let's transition into the final segment. What do you got this week? What's new? What's good? What do you got?
So, I can't remember if we actually talked about this the last time before, but Lana Del Rey, Chemtrails Over the Country Club. This is a fantastic record. Really well reviewed through Rolling Stone. I bought it when we were actually kind of researching, women in music. It's a great record. I've been putting it on and listening to it, constantly. The other one is I just got this one today. So Blue Note Records, predominantly a jazz label, they've been putting out some tremendous stuff, and they actually released a double live album from Norah Jones.
I was listening to her the other day. I was watching her do a solo video from her house.
Unbelievable voice. What a beautiful voice
fantastic.
That she has. I mean, just incredible.
So I want to touch on that Lana Del Rey. We had a discussion, as we usually do. It wasn't on air. She does a cover of Sublime's Summertime. Yeah. And you said, that song's been around. The version that they do has nothing to do with the old ragtime, the old version that's been around.
Yes, it does.
I'm telling you it doesn't.
Yes, it does.
It has none of the lyrics except for Summertime and The Living's Easy.
So there you go. You just said it. It actually references that's the melody from that old song.
References that song, that old Summertime song, more than this Sublime and Lana Del Rey doing a remake of Sublime's is Iggy Pop's Girls. He says the whole phrase in there. The summer's hot and the cotton is high. Your daddy's rich and your mama's good looking. I mean, he references that song more than Sublime does. You can't say just because it has a name.
That old song.
It's not the tune. I listened. I went back and listened. It's not. It's nothing.
And The Living is Easy is not. It's not a sample. It's not a cut from that old one.
That is not. And then the rest of the song is totally different.
Yeah, but they still.
I don't think Cab Calloway was saying Rodney's on the microphone to Ross MG. I don't think he was saying that in that song. Whoever sang Summertime. So
they leveraged the melody or a part of the melody for that song. I mean, it's their own version of a sample, which is fine. I think they turned it into their own. But you can't deny the fact that they actually were influenced and used part of that original old sample.
I'm denying it. I think Iggy Pop singing Girls is a more representative
But we're not
version
talking
of
about Iggy Pop
Summertime.
singing girls. We're talking
He took
about
the
the
whole
Sublime.
verse.
Originally, we were talking about the Lana Del Rey song.
I know, but Iggy Pop takes the whole verse, not 2 words, summertime. That's I'm not buying this. I think that you're pushing bullshit on me.
Here we were. We were almost out. We had a nice show where we got along.
Nah,
and
I
had a
was
good
hoping
time.
you were gonna bring
and
this
then you
up.
had to open this can of worms, you giant piece of poop.
Yeah. Anyways, I'm right, you're wrong as usual. So, anyways, I finally got this in the mail yesterday. I got this album, and I talked about it on our Irish Music in America, The Murder Capital. Great album. They've been around since 2018. They're a post-punk band out of Dublin, Ireland. That's why it took so long to get this album. I'm showing it. I'm showing the album on the screen to the podcast viewers. These kids even look like they have attitudes. You know what I mean? And they have a really cool sound. I'm pretty sure no one out there is going to go download the Murder Capital or go listen to the Murder Capital, but I am, because I know good music when I hear it. This is good music. So my recommendation for the week is The Murder Capital, When I Have Fears is the name of the album. So with that, buddy, another show in the books. I want to thank everyone for watching, and the people that will be, they're watching over YouTube, Facebook Live, and Twitch.
Time and the living's easy.
You're going to break up my outro, aren't you? You're really going to try to get this in. It's not happening, buddy. No. So for you podcast listeners, thank you for listening. Give us a good thumbs up. Give us a subscribe to us. Give us a good rating. Give us a good comment. If you like us, share it. We would appreciate it. We're on a slow incline with this podcast. The numbers are slowly rising. This is a marathon, not a sprint. We appreciate your loyalty. We appreciate you listening. We put our heart into this. It's fun to do, but it is time, and we love doing it. So, with that said, for the viewers, again, thank you for watching, and the listeners, thank you for listening, and we will see you next week on Milk Crates and Turntables. Jack, stay on, and everybody else.
Ain't the boss of me. I don't have to stay on.
See, I was just trying to end this nice. Good Lord.